Welcome everyone. So we're here today with Nicolas Nadeau. He's the founder of Nadeau Innovation, and today we're going to discuss all together about like the innovation in the medical device and medtech, I would say, industry, especially focusing on the impact of AI and robotics within the medtech industry. So welcome, Nicolas. How are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, very. It's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure. Very nice to talk with another French speaker from Quebec. So very nice to have you here. So, Nicola, I just want to first try to discuss about like your background. I'm just interested to let everyone to understand like where you come from, what you did study, what's your background and experience, and how did you arrive to create like another innovation?
Yeah, it's super. So in French, we would call me a touche à tout, so a person who touches
Okay.
everything, a jack of all trades. Once upon a time, I was on my way to medicine, really aiming for pre-med, want to be an orthopedic surgeon, but then took a left turn into mechanical engineering and spent my first few years in undergrad building race cars, eventually did a double degree in biomedical engineering. And that's when I got into the medtech field. So I still got my fix for medtech through the engineering pathway. And that was at a R&D company called Rogue Research, where we really focused on moonshot projects. So I spent nearly 10 years there, building everything from surgical robots to cognitive neuroscience, imaging and stimulation devices, pharmaceutical, animal research, all the way up to the human side of things. And that really gave me a bit more of that full stack engineering experience of taking ideas. We often worked with universities or purchased IP where, it worked on a Tuesday when the moon was out just for a paper or publication and took that from ideation to commercialization. Really that whole design cycle of a product. A lot of fun, a lot of,
Wow.
breaking things, making things, trying crazy ideas. But we had a lot of fun. Some of my favorite projects were designing one of the first portable near-infrared spectroscopy systems to controllable transcranial magnetic stimulation to using industrial robots for neurosurgery on small animals, really bringing that robotic and AI precision to the OR space.
Amazing, amazing. So that's how you basically start to experience like the full experience about like developing products in that specific industry, and that's how gave you like the willingness to go and work with startups. That's what you wanted to do after.
Yeah, so that it really I cut my teeth essentially at doing the whole product life cycle, got exposure to, QMS, FDA, Health Canada, and all the other regulatory bodies that are involved in building medical devices and especially electrical and electronic devices that have to cross borders and getting
Okay.
the certifications behind those, everything from, IEC to UL certifications. Um, and from there, with that experience, I realized, okay, what's next? I got the startup bug, like a lot of young entrepreneurs do, where we want to explore things maybe at a faster pace, a little more moonshotty than I was already doing. And that's when I jumped into the Montreal startup scene, went through a few accelerators, worked with some companies. In parallel, I was also doing my doctorate at the same time. So that was at night, startups were during the day, and eventually landed on a 3D printing startup here in Montreal, just out of Y Combinator, where we were building high performance, open material 3D printing systems for the biomedical, defense, aerospace market. So really those markets that we're looking for, can I get the best polymers and the best quality, but lower volume? So medical, aerospace, defense were great targets for this. And for me, one of my real like value propositions why I wanted to join this company, so this was Aeon 3D, I forget if I said that,
Yep.
was that I was building peak PEC implants previously in my biomedical days. So I'd start off with a big block of PEEK, and that's a biocompatible polymer that's also image compatible. So like unlike stainless steel or titanium, you can't necessarily send that into an MR or an SCT or an X-ray. Whereas with PEEK and PEC, they are image compatible. And so now instead of starting with a giant block of this material and shaving it down on a CNC to an itty bitty implant, I can use additive techniques and actually build these personalized medicine implants from scratch, from the ground up, using only the material I actually needed to use. And even more from a personalized medicine point of view, is I would have a platter of parts on a 3D printer. And so I can build multiple implants all at once in one, lot essentially. And which was really fun because my experience from Rogue Research is a part of our bread and butter was using image-based techniques to do customization. So mixing that imaging space 3D reconstruction and applying that to
Mm,
essentially cookie cutter implants. So having the same template design that we then would customize per patient, per subject. And with 3D
mm.
printing, we unlock so much more possibilities of customization and sort of like a closed loop customization workflow where it just became part of the standard workflow instead of being something special.
Okay. And is that the time where you start to get exposed with AI when on that customization to patient specific data, and that's when you
Yeah,
started
so I
to
guess
do
that
that?
would be a good transition point. At Rogue Research, we were using, let's call it the basics of AI, maybe machine learning is a better term, to do some, I was going to say pre-prompting, but essentially pre-fill some of the best choices, and some of our algorithms would have the best seed values to, get the algorithm off the ground and give you basically help the workflow of the user. But really it's through my PhD that was in parallel to all this, where I was using collaborative robots with artificial intelligence to sort of do closed loop calibration and closed loop human body, human robot
Mm,
interaction. And applying that
mhm.
technique of hardware in the loop to AI, that's when we jumped into Aeon 3D and really trying to look at, okay, how can we look at the entire life cycle of a part from going into a design phase where I want specific mechanical properties with specific polymers,
Mm,
how can the inputs and my design intent mix with things like, temperature, speed, all the other print parameters that go into 3D printing, how can that create a part outcome? And what kind of
mm.
model can be built to best predict the outcome of the parts based on the inputs? And so this was some of the first work that was being done in the additive manufacturing space towards, let's call it, artificial augmented part design.
Sounds good. Wow, that's very interesting. So depending on the patient, like you, what kind of data do you take as input on those model? You mentioned like speed.
Yeah.
What's
So
the
in standard 3D printing parameters, you have your nozzle temperature, you have your bed and chamber temperature, you have your speed, you have other parameters you can play with like layer heights, widths. And then when you get into the fancy materials, you might have crystallization that comes into play. So you actually have to time it, and it's not just static per layer. From the patient side view, we'd often take the MR or CT images, do 3D reconstruction. So either with an MR, you might have to do a bone reconstruction using the signal void, or with the CT, you get the bone right away. And from there, you can essentially do Boolean intersections between your 3D models that come from your part design to the 3D model that comes from your
Mm,
imaging space, creating a customized implant that essentially fits in one place perfectly each and every time. And what's a lot of fun
sounds
about
good.
this as well is, you go a step further, you can actually pre-plan your whole OR and operating experience afterwards, where if it fits in one place exactly, you can then create like robot pathways and OR workflows that are really customized to each step to really set the surgeon up for success in a lot of ways.
Okay. If I may just try to, I mean, we cover like a little bit like the use of AI in this specific use case. I'm interested to know what's your take on the medical device market, okay, and industry in general, and how basically AI can be innovating that specific industry, but more like generally, I would
Yeah,
say.
so in general, things are slow. Anything in a regulated market is much slower than a, Wild West type market. And there's a reason for that. It's a good
Yeah,
thing in a lot of ways. And so even while
yeah,
we can't just deploy AI into the ecosystem all on its own without taking the proper precautions, I like using it in the design cycle phases in order to explore the problem space more robustly so that we can come out with solutions that are, better for the patient outcomes, better for the actual therapeutic outcomes, better for the surgeon or our user experience of our end users. And really being able to better explore this problem space makes AI such a powerful tool. And I know Microsoft likes to use the co-pilot terminology, but I like that term where you have an
Yeah.
assistant working alongside you, not necessarily replacing you or
Yeah.
any of your features or functions. And so if we look at different things, so for instance, one of my portfolio companies right now, Fem Therapeutics, we did a partnership recently with the Mayo Clinic where we explored patient data and patient notes and using natural language processing and AI to better explore the patient journey through pelvic organ prolapse and really determine what are the best next steps essentially in that journey to reduce time to a successful therapeutic treatment. Where we look at back to the work I did in the past week with Fem Therapeutics again with 3D printing. Can we take patient data, everything from height, weight to BMI, certain measurements around the physiology, and create implants and prosthetics that best fit the patient instead of thinking of a one size fit all approach that a lot of medicine is based off of right now. A lot of parts, since they're mass produced, are basically small, medium, or large. Why do we need to constrain ourselves to those bounds when we can have a little more customization based off the measurements and the other metadata that we can collect around the patient, their journey, and even other up-to-date information coming from the ecosystem combined with manufacturing techniques
Mm.
like 3D printing. And so what's fun like this is the design cycle is customized, but the actual output is using the same silicones, the same base materials and approaches and manufacturing methods that we would typically use in standard medical device manufacturing. We're just taking things a step earlier to
Mm.
bring customization and design and user experience into the process through AI augmented tools.
And again, those AI tools are, I mean, as of right now, on the level of the R&D on those tools, they really here to assist you, but not like making the decision for you, right? I mean, that's really like the current state.
Well, they can make
of,
decisions for you. It's just I don't think a lot of people have had that certified yet in a lot of ways. And so
yeah,
you
exactly.
have techniques right now, for instance, retrieval augmented generation, so RAG, that's very powerful using the latest LLMs, so the large language models. And instead of just being trained on the whole internet, like ChatGPT is trained on right now, it constrains the search space of these models to just a set of documents. Maybe the most recent journal publications from the Lancet or the Journal of New English Medicine, or maybe your internal documentation for your product specifications, your drugs, your prosthetics, your implants. And so now, as a doctor, a surgeon, a medical professional, even somebody in the pharmaceutical space or a pharmacist, you can now look up things in a natural language way and get feedback and get context from this more constrained, more robust and reliable search space. So instead of having hallucinations from the general internet, you're pulling data from your controlled data set, which makes it a lot more useful in these contexts when making decisions. Now, what's missing right here is we still have the human as the final decision maker. So even if these LLMs or these AI models are coming up with brilliant ideas, we still have that safety valve, if you will, of the human making the final decision. We just have, once again, a co-pilot helping us find and retrieve that information more efficiently and effectively so that we can make better decisions ourselves.
Sounds good. No, it makes sense. How does the FDA is reacting to that as of right now?
From my work and what I've know and what I've seen in progress is the best way to define that. There's a lot of interest, and I've seen a lot of good work being done once again on the design side. I see there's a Montreal company like Valence
Yeah.
AI that is doing great work to help make the drug discovery process much more efficient and effective. So you have all these groups and teams and startups focusing on the design side, and even I'm waiting for the first, FDA LLM, if you will, where we can use techniques like retrieval augmented generation to parse past successful and maybe non-successful applications to the FDA to better assist ourselves when drafting our applications. All these are techniques that are starting to come up, but there is no clear line in the sand of what is valid, what is not valid. It needs to go through the whole
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
anyways of making sure that patient,
Yeah.
subject, people safety is first and foremost.
What's the main challenges for company to deploy AI or to
So I
successfully
actually gave
deploy
a
AI
I gave a
in
talk
their
recently
view?
about this topic from the manufacturing sector and the industry 4.0 sector perspective, but I'd say it's almost the exact same thing no matter what
Okay.
sector you're in. It's stakeholder alignment. To be honest, most useful AI, it's a really low barrier to entry these days. We can use all these phenomenal tools that are readily available, open source, off the shelf, integrated with cloud ecosystems. They're really pretty easy to go from 0 to 1 and get things moving off the ground. Where I see misalignment is in the stakeholders, in the expectation management of when kicking off a project like this. What do the executives expect versus what do the engineering or individual contributors expect? What do your end user stakeholders, like medical professionals, expect as a tool versus, the software developers on the back end? Have they communicated? Have they aligned user stories? And that's where I find a lot of AI projects tend to go off the rails and where expectations don't meet the actuality of the deliverables is that going into the project, one group of people had one vastly different set of expectations than another group of people. And that just tends to diverge as the project goes on. And so if you're not thinking about your customer, if you're not thinking about your end users, having that very user centric design in mind, you're not really building tools that will set your people up for success. And that's why for me, like personally, AI is really a design problem at the end of the day. It's a user experience problem. And the tools we use honestly are just implementation details. But if we really think about what do our users need, what will set them up for success, that can really make AI projects much more successful, no matter the domain, whether it be industry or medtech.
No, no, that makes sense, and I think like I saw like your last webinar, and I think like in the last webinar you were mentioning
Yeah,
the 4Ds. Can you touch on that and how it does relate
Yeah, so the
with
four
AI?
Ds they come traditionally from robotics. I've personally used it now across robotics to AI to anything that I consider intelligent system. So whether it's deployed in the real world like a robot or it's just in a server somewhere in the cloud like a SaaS AI, I like to think about the four Ds as the value proposition for any intelligent system application, and that's dull, dangerous, dirty, and dear. And for me, if your application doesn't relate to at least one of these four Ds, then there's a good chance that the application is just fancy for the sake of being fancy. And not really delivering real world value that these current intelligent systems can deliver. So dull are the repetitive, tedious tasks, things like data entry, things like if in the medical context, we're thinking about just collecting the rote patient data. Dull, dangerous are any of the applications where we're putting humans into harm's way. So going into an infectious area in the hospital or even transporting soiled linens. And that's why dangerous often relates to dirty because they often coincide. They're not always one for one, but dirty could be anything from, once again, transporting soiled linens across the hospital to just cleaning up the rooms, the flooring, disinfecting the rooms. We saw a lot of robots and AI systems post COVID being able to UV sanitize rooms autonomously. And then there's deer. And this is where a lot of medical devices and medical systems come into play is these are tasks and applications that have a very high quality requirement or cost component to it. And so we want to make sure that patient
Mhm.
outcomes are first and foremost. So that's the deer in terms of quality. But we also want it to be able to reduce costs that we can better reinvest those operational costs into other aspects of our healthcare or application.
Okay, and so how AI and robotics are basically addressing
So,
that challenge?
simple examples, if I want to merge like dirty and dull, cleaning rooms after each patient, having autonomous UV sanitizing robots.
Yeah.
If I want to combine dear and potentially dangerous, is just collecting the initial intake information from patients without having to necessarily expose yourself to patients, especially in terms of a pandemic situation. These are all areas where AI and robotics, for me, interchangeable. It's just an application interface at the end of the day, can really assist in that. And eventually, if we go a step further and really think about, dull, I like to track with my Apple Watch and things like that, my workouts, heart rate and all that, to manually input that data and feed that back to our medical professionals, our doctors, and our physicians and caretakers, it's a rote task. And what eventually happens is I have sparse data because I'm not inputting it every day or whenever I'm supposed to be. But if we have these systems that are once again co-pilots, AI assistants with us in our day-to-day lives, collecting the necessary information that we ourselves are terrible at inputting or make mistakes at inputting, this is a great example of a dull task in the medical industry that can really bring a lot of value to a more longitudinal and proactive healthcare outcome.
Sounds good. I want to get as well like your take on where the market is going related to AI, robotics, especially like on the med tech. What's your take on
Yeah,
that? What's
so
the future
20 or
behind
so years ago when I got started into tech,
it?
everybody was
Yeah,
becoming a software company. Then I'd say 5, 10 years ago, everyone started becoming like an
yeah,
AI machine learning company. The question was, where's your AI? What are you doing to leverage it? Now it's sort of table stakes. You have to have AI somewhere in your
yeah.
product. What I find what's coming really next is everyone's becoming a data company. Everyone's asking, where is your data? What is your proprietary data? What is the data set that really sets you apart from your competition? Because now these, as I said before, these AI models and these systems are off the shelf. Everyone's using the same things at the end of the day. What
Ex-
differentiates businesses is the data that
yeah.
they're actually able to put together that lets them leverage these systems more effectively than their competition. And so, sort of like the example I just said before, that my Apple Watch, whatever that input data, patient data. Quebec is actually going through a healthcare transformation process right now of exploring the patient journey from a data driven perspective as well. So that's where I see the industry as a whole is being much more data driven. And data driven doesn't just necessarily mean open loop. We're not just looking at patients and collecting data and having that data and doing pretty dashboards. It's about closing the loop as well and being proactive about our healthcare. And so really the next steps is, can we take that data and build prosthetics that are customized for different patients, very much like my work with Fem Therapeutics. Can we take that data and make suggestions that better lead to a healthier, happier lifestyle that leads to better medical and patient outcomes? And at the end of the day, you have different, let's call it drivers of the system. You can look at a metric around patient outcomes. You can also look at metrics around cost. How can we use data to reduce the operational cost of our healthcare system, to improve the flow of goods, supply chain, procurement, just general cost of quality of life, everything, the cost of quality as well. These are all things that data can help, not only forecast, but close the loop and put a finger on the scale a bit.
No, that sounds good. It's great to I mean to get your thoughts since like you're working with all those different startups. So it's important. I think people listening to that podcast will, I think, and I hope like understand like the value, especially like when you have corporate companies which can potentially benefit from those different use cases. Can you just what's the best way for corporate companies to basically
Mhm.
adapt to those trends? Like, how do you can you have any
Yeah, so the
advice
step
on
one
to share?
is, where's your data? So figure out where your data is. If it's still on Excel files or, God forbid, on paper copies hidden in the filing cabinet somewhere, there's going to be a step zero of making that data accessible. But once you have your data accessible, really it's about asking a question. I see a lot of teams starting with the data and then looking for things to do with the data. And so they're essentially going fishing. I don't like to go fishing. I like to
Mm,
start at the other end. What is the outcome you want to drive? What is the question you want to ask that you just don't have the answer to yet? And then we work backwards from there. And we then identify what data we need to extract, transform, load. So the ETL chain of data processing to really get to those answers. And it's honestly as simple as that. Once you have a team, and I like to build almost like skunkworks teams around this, a few people dedicated to answering questions at the end of the day. And from there, we can build models, we can build tools, we can integrate things to answer really business driven, outcome driven questions and results that we're going to bring to our stakeholders. So
mm.
identify your stakeholders, know what they need, have an executive sponsor essentially, have some freedom to be agile and explore the problem space, but always have a mission and vision in mind and work backwards from there. And if you do it that way, I find once again, expectations, alignment tend to better resolve, and the outcome of the projects tend to be more successful. The other bit is, as any good project, keep it small scoped, start small, grow into big. Don't try and do everything all at once.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Thank you so much. I think like you share like a lot of value today. What do you think is the best way to get in touch
The
with
best
you
way to get in
everyone
touch with me is
in
through my
future?
website, nadeauinnovation.com. So that's NADEAUINNOVATIONS. I guess you'll probably have a link to that on your podcast. Otherwise, find me on LinkedIn at Nicholas Nadeau.